world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
So the questions, will the mics go around, or do they?
I will take the mic around.
Thank you.
Yep, and then we'll make sure.
All right. Well, welcome to this session. It is a workshop, so we expect to be working. I will give some initial remarks. I'd like to show you a video, and then I just invite questions. I'll tell you right away that when you ask me a question, you're just as likely to get a question back. And that's an invitation for you to engage in a conversation. You don't have to, it's an invitation, not a demand. So you don't have to accept. If you don't feel like answering my question, just say, "I don't feel like answering your question." I might invite some of you to, in fact, is it possible to get a couple of chairs on stage? Because I might invite sometimes somebody to come up just to have a conversation with me. But let me just plunge in. The therapeutic approach that I helped to develop is called compassionate inquiry. And how it evolved is very simple. I was in family practice. I began to notice I had, by the way, I have not had 1 hour of formal training as a counselor, as a therapist, or psychologist. Okay, so anybody thinks they're here for credentials, go away. Okay? But what happened was that I was in family practice. I began to notice that who got sick and who didn't wasn't accidental. There were certain personality traits, lifelong patterns, processes associated with diagnoses, and which also, and this is true whether I'm talking about addiction or ADHD or autoimmune disease or malignancy. So that, as I said this morning, these were not things that people mysteriously or calamitously acquired. They were actually manifestations of their lives. And that wasn't an overnight epiphany. It was a gradual dawning of an awareness. What I didn't know is that other doctors, other researchers, psychologists had also noticed the same thing and researched them and documented it. It's just that nobody ever tells you this stuff in medical school. So I can tell you, in 1939, there was a very famous teacher of medicine, a medical doctor at Harvard University, who, like myself, was a Jew from Hungary. His name was Soma Weiss. He was so revered that to this day at Harvard they have a Soma Weiss name day in his honor, a research day. And Soma Weiss in 1939 gave a lecture to the medical school class at Harvard, and he said that psychological and emotional factors are at least as important in the causation of illness as physical factors, as physiological factors, and they must be at least as important in the healing of them. He was talking about the mind-body unity. This lecture was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1940. 6 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, a psychiatrist at Harvard, and he said to me, now this is, keep in mind, they still have a day in his honor, but this psychiatrist at Harvard said to me, to talk about mind-body medicine at Harvard to this day is to jeopardize your career. In 1972, I think it was, there was a very famous American physician and psychiatrist, George Engel, who said that the problem is that physicians separate the mind from the body and the individual from the environment, and he called for what he termed a biopsychosocial view of medicine. It's disappeared without a trace almost. 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece, 2,400 years ago, Socrates said that the problem with the doctors of today is that they separate the mind from the body. We haven't come too far. And when you wonder what that's all about, there's many different factors, but the fundamental one is our fear of pain. And especially our fear of emotional pain. Now, what is that fear based on? It's based on a very simple fact. First of all, in the brain itself, the same part of the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, that registers the suffering of physical pain, also registers the suffering of emotional pain. And the endorphins, the body's natural opiates, soothe both emotional and physical pain. But for the endorphin circuits to develop properly, they need the right environment. Just like I said this morning, for the serotonin circuits, the dopamine circuits, endorphin circuits, oxytocin circuits, we all need the right environment. And the right environment is the presence of emotionally present, consistently available, non-stressed, non-depressed, attuned parenting caregivers. And those conditions in this society are not only lacking, they're rapidly disappearing. And if you want to look at the epidemic, all these so-called genetic disorders, ADHD, well, if it's genetic, why the heck is it increasing all the time? Genes don't change in a population over 20 or 30 years. If things are genetic, then why is it that the risk for women for multiple sclerosis has doubled or tripled in the last 80 years? Genes don't change over 80 years. I could go on. But the point is that it's our fear of pain. So it also, when it comes to therapy then, the last thing we have to be afraid of is people's pain. Not that we should cause pain deliberately. It's not our job to trigger pain deliberately. That's cruel. But at the same time, we must not be afraid of people's pain either. In fact, the fundamental thing that happened, and I mentioned that this morning, is that when you had pain as a child, that's not a problem. Life brings pain, and the Buddha recognized that 2,500 years ago. Life is painful. It's the nature of life to bring pain, to bring suffering. That's not the problem. The problem is that we're all alone with the pain, and there's nobody to hold us in it. Then becomes unbearable for the child. And that unbearability then is what then causes the child, i.e. your future client, to develop all these defense mechanisms and adaptations. So if you look at something like ADHD, which I mentioned this morning, the absent-mindedness is not a disease, it's a coping mechanism. When there's a lot of stress in the kid's environment, not because the parents don't love the child, but the parent is just stressed, the child is stressed. How does the child protect himself? Well, one way to protect yourself is to go absent-minded, to tune out, to dissociate. which then becomes wired into your brain, because that's when the brain is developing. Now you're told you got this disease. No, you don't. What you got is a coping mechanism that had a value when it originally was adopted, but it no longer has value and now gets in your way. Same with pushing people's emotions down, as happens in depression. That was a coping mechanism at some point. But that same coping mechanism, or addiction, genetic disease, no it isn't. It's neither a disease nor is it genetic. What is it actually? Well, let's just do a quick survey here. I'll give you a definition of an addiction that I don't think is particularly controversial. So addiction is manifested in any behavior in which a person finds temporary pleasure or relief, but then suffers negative consequences as a result of, and does not or cannot give up despite the harm. So, pleasure, relief, craving in the short term, harm in the long term, inability to desist. That's what an addiction is. And notice that I said nothing about drugs. It could be drugs. Could be illegal drugs, with which it's perfectly legitimate to kill yourself, like nicotine or alcohol. Or it could be the illegal drugs like heroin or cocaine. Could also be eating, shopping, bulimia, self-cutting, pornography, compulsive sexual acting out, work, extreme sports, many, many things. So it's not the behavior as such, it's your relationship to it. You can drink and not be an alcoholic. You can eat and not be a food addict. You can even do heroin and not be a heroin addict. Not that I recommend it. The question is the relationship to it. Craving relief, pleasure in the short term, harm in the long term, inability to get up, you got an addiction. So, with that definition in mind, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand if you've ever had an addiction in your life, okay? Well, that's how common it is. Which also brings up an interesting question of why do we ostracize the drug addicts so much when they're just like the rest of us? That's another question I won't go into now. But here's what I'm going to ask you now. I'm not going to ask any of you what you're addicted to or when. Just in the front rows where I can hear you. The question I'm asking is, if you're willing to volunteer, not what was wrong with the addiction. And in this book, this is not my book on addiction. My book on addiction is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, but I do revisit the issue in 2 chapters in this book, The Myth of Normal. And the question I'm asking in this book is not what's wrong with the addiction, but what's right about it. What does it give you in the short term that makes you want to keep going back to it? So anybody in the front row, what does it do for you, Amy? Helps you keep going. Survive what? What does it help you survive? Meaninglessness. So you get a sense of meaning. Somebody else? Yeah, right behind you, John. Yeah?
So the addiction helped to mitigate the loneliness of feeling the absence of connection.
Okay, meaning, sense of connection, yes?
The sense of like being validation and
Finally,
being validated.
being validated. Okay,
And
thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah?
Help me deal with helplessness.
Sense of evidence. Okay, all right. I could keep going, and each of these manifestations that you've all articulated, helplessness, lack of meaning, lack of validation, these are a form of emotional pain. And nobody's born with them. You never met a 1-day-old baby with a sense of lack of meaning. What's life all about anyway? You know? You never met a one-day-old baby who's healthy, who needs validation. They are their own validation. So, in other words, and my mantra, therefore, is don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And if you want to understand why the pain, don't look at people's genes, look at their lives. We're talking about trauma. And the people who are so nice and they push down their emotions, their healthy anger. Now, pushing down your healthy anger, by the way, diminishes your immune system, documentably, physiologically, because that's one system. Think about it. Healthy anger, we're wired for anger, you know. Our brains are wired for a whole range of emotions, biologically, by evolution. And each of these emotions are necessary for survival. And we share these same emotional circuits with other mammals. So we're wired for loving, caring, and we have associated brain circuits with endorphins and oxytocin and prolactin and so on. We're wired for curiosity, seeking, vitality. Without that, no creature survives. We're wired for grief. We're wired for fear. These are all essential. We're also wired for anger. And anger is simply a boundary defense, healthy anger I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, toxic rage. I'm talking about healthy anger. It's simply a boundary defense. If I were to intrude on you right now, you better say no. Get out, it's my space. That's healthy anger. It's a boundary defense. In fact, the role of emotions in general is what? Is to allow in, to invite in that which is caring and nurturing and welcome, and to keep out that which is not. That's generally the role of emotions. Now, trick question for you. What's the role of the immune system? The same damn thing. Keep out whatever is unhealthy and toxic and dangerous, and to welcome in that which is nutritious and life-supporting. Now, not only do they have the same role, they are the same system. Physiologically, scientifically, although they don't teach you this in the medical schools for some weird reason, but which is a whole other issue, it's one system. When you're suppressing your boundary defenses, your healthy anger, you're suppressing your immune system as well. Which then, just as healthy anger can, if you suppress it, can turn against you in a form of depression and self-loathing. It can also turn against you physiologically through autoimmune disease, where the immune system is now attacking you. So these connections are pretty straightforward, scientifically not in the least controversial, and completely ignored in most of medical education. But what we're talking about in all of these cases, so whether it's addiction, which is an attempt to escape from pain, whether it's being nice so that people will like you because they didn't get the love you needed, so now you have to be very nice so people will like you, and that's just a compensation. All these compensatory mechanisms came along for a good reason, and now they're creating problems for you. So the essence of it all was a disconnection from the self. And that disconnection, if we're compassionate about it, wasn't a mistake on your part. It wasn't a decision that you made. It was simply how you survived. Because the child has these two needs. Well, I should say a child has more than two needs, but a child is born with expectations. In fact, that's not even true. The child is not born with expectations. The child has no conscious sense of expecting anything. The child is an expectation. It's an expectation for food. It's an expectation for oxygen. Our lungs don't expect oxygen. They're an expectation for oxygen. They evolved in an oxygen-bearing environment. That's why we have lungs. In the same way, human beings evolved in a certain environment that met their needs. So we're born with those expectations. That will be physically nurtured and protected. That will be emotionally cared for. That will be seen, understood, validated, accepted, valued. Those are the expectations the child is born with. When that happens, I should say when that doesn't happen, either because overt big T trauma, like the adverse childhood experiences that we talked about these days, or because, not because anything terrible happened, but simply because the expectations that the child was born with for being validated, seen, held, emotionally understood, valued, weren't met, that's also wounding. So you can wound kids by doing bad things to them that you shouldn't. You can also wound kids just in an environment that's not able to meet the expectations that the child is. And in a country like the United States, where 25% of women have to go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, and mostly, of course, poor women and women of color, do we wonder that there's all this epidemic of childhood so-called disorders and diseases? These are in fact normal responses to abnormal circumstances. That's why in my book I talk about the myth of normal. So amongst the child expectations, primary is attachment, which is the drive for closeness and proximity with another human being for the purpose of being taken care of, or for the purpose of taking care of the other. We're wired for it. Most of us are capable of holding on to that. If we don't, we go into politics. But that's a whole other question. Well, I mean, the uncaring things they do. In Britain, the new Labour government, you know the first thing they did? They cut off heating support for poor elderly. That's the first thing they did. That's a tremendous act of non-caring. You have to be totally emotionally shut down to be able to do that to people. It gets pretty cold in Britain in the wintertime. I could go on. So we have this need for attachment, to be close to somebody, to be taken care of. But we have this other need, and I'll illustrate this with another question for you. Have you ever had the experience of having a strong gut feeling about something, and then you ignored it, and then you regretted it afterwards? So if you had that experience, raise your hand, okay? Again, the vast majority. Now you just told me the story of your childhood. Because gut feelings are nature-driven, biologically embedded, evolutionary survival mechanisms. The gut has more serotonin than the brain does. The gut sends many more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the gut. We evolved out there in nature until a few thousand years ago. Through our evolution, millions of years of human evolution, hundreds of thousands of years of our own species, we lived out in nature. How long does any creature in nature survive without connection to their gut feelings? So it's not a luxury. But when you put your hand up, you know what story you told? You told the story that at some point you got the message that if you stay connected to yourself, you will not be accepted. So there's this, what in the myth of normal I call the tragic tension between, on the one hand, attachment and in the other authenticity. Ideally, and this is what you want for your clients, you want them to be able to find meaningful relationships in which they can be themselves without having to pretend, without having to self-suppress. It's difficult enough, as you know, even for an adult, to maintain that sense of authenticity if that threatens your relationships. And especially if there are other social, cultural factors. If people are racialized, it becomes even more difficult. The great American black writer James Baldwin said that to be a black in the United States is to live in a state of suppressed anger all the time. But a black person who's angry, we know what happens to them in this culture. Women who get angry, what happens to them in this culture? So that even for adults, the drive to be authentic is so difficult to manifest and to realize. For a child, if you got the option of being authentic, expressing your emotions, which is a need of yours, it's the child's need to express all their emotions, rage, anger, fear, grief, pain, and to have those emotions validated, accepted, and received with compassion by the adults. Now, when the adults can't do that, let alone if you're being abused, you have a choice to make. I can be authentic and lose the attachment figures on whom my life depends, or I can suppress my authenticity for the sake of attachment. And that then becomes a lifelong pattern. And everybody who walks into your office, that's what they're bringing to your office. At some point I had to suppress myself, and then I had to run away from the pain through addiction or through self-suppression, whatever. So, there's a way back. I'm going to quote you now Peter Levine, who's one of the great trauma theorists and pioneers. And Peter wrote in his recent book, and I'll have the pleasure of working with Peter and also with Bessel and others, and Scott Lyons and others in a couple of weeks in Massachusetts. Peter writes, "We all have the capacity to heal. I believe there exists in humans a fundamental primal drive towards wholeness and health. In fact, wholeness means health. Health means wholeness. Literally, that's what it means. This includes access to a part of ourselves that has always been within, that lives beyond any trauma and is eternally whole and undamaged. It is a part that could be called the true self or real self. I would only add that this drive is to become more like our true self, more like who we really are outside of our roles and personas. He says, in my experience, this drive is akin to that innate impulse towards curiosity and exploration. So, the whole idea of my compassion inquiry is that I'm assuming that the answers are within everybody, if you ask the right questions. And Peter says, sadly, this primal instinctual energy is all too often forced underground by oppressive over-socialization, overwhelmed by toxic stress and trauma. But he says, nevertheless, this powerful resource lives deep within all of us and lies in wait, ready to be awakened at the right moment. So that's what we're banking on, is that that true self is there, that the right, in the presence of compassion, people can drop their defenses so they can really find who they are. And that may be attended by experiences of pain and grief. They're welcome. Again, not that you deliberately set out to evoke pain, but that if people are getting in touch with what's there, pain's going to arise. And you welcome it. And you're not scared by it. And you don't try to distance from it. I'm going to stop talking here and take questions, but before I do, I want to show you a video. And this video is a 2-minute message sent to me from death row by somebody. This is from Texas, and as you know, Texas executes people, and Texas especially executes, not exclusively, but disproportionately, black men. So this guy, whose name is Howard, is in a death row in Texas. Typical story, traumatized childhood. Age 13, he gets into a gang for companionship and power and a sense of belonging. They get into drugs, and then at age 18, he kills somebody. Now in Texas, there are 2 trials. First, there's the trial to determine guilt. Of course, he was guilty. He committed the murder. Then the second trial is about the sentence, where the prosecution's job is to convince the jury that this man has no redeeming qualities, no possibility of redemption. He does not belong on this earth. He must not walk this planet amongst us. So he's sentenced to death. And then the appeal process begins. So this man has been in death row in a cage for the last 22 years. And if he wins his appeal, his best case scenario is life without parole. That's what he can hope for. Now, he thanks me in this message for my understanding of addiction, but that's not why I'm showing it to you. I'm showing it to you because I want to show you guys what healing looks like. So if I can get this video playing.
I just want to give a brief message.
No. I started to play the video, but oh yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah.
Dr. Gabor Mate, because he means.
Can you turn the lights down a bit?
He's had a real impact on my life. But just directly to Dr. Gabor.
Excuse me, can we turn the house lights on just for the video? Is that possible? Yes, no? Oh, they're doing it. Okay. All right, can you dim it even more? All right, well, let's
Boy,
try
I
this.
mean, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for having the compassion that you have for people. I wish there were 100 million people like you. But you're a perfect example of how like one person can have so much influence and so much power to change things in the world. And I want you to know that like, even me, I've had problems with addiction in my life. When I was a kid, I started smoking marijuana when I was 12. And all the way through, I smoked. In prison, I've done some drugs too, just to try to cope. It's just a coping mechanism for me. But in the back of my mind, deep down inside, I knew that like it was just me running away from my reality because I was afraid of it. And there are men like you in prison that sat down with me and they didn't browbeat me about the drugs that I did. They just spent time with me. They loved on me. They fed me. They showed me who I was, and they allowed me to be me. But just being there, their love for me was enough to motivate me just to leave it behind, to face reality. And man, I'm addicted now to living. I'm addicted to looking forward to life, to contributing to life. And I just want to thank you, man, for the books you've written. In the Room of Hungry Ghosts is one of my favorite books. But continue doing the work that you do. We need you, and I'm so fortunate to be able to give you this message. Thank you.
Okay, well, now we can have the lights back on. Thank you. So, okay, look, it's not the personal things. I mean, I appreciate the personal things. But what do you see in him? Don't you see a light? Do you see a groundedness? Don't you see a sense of peace that you wish you had? I do. And a love of life. He says, I love life, I'm going to contribute to life. And this is a life that he's got to look forward to. If he wins this case, they'll be in jail for the rest of his life. Well, what can you say about the possibility of healing? How can you doubt the possibility of healing when you look at a man like that? And what is it that allowed him to get there? He said it. People came and visited him in jail who treated him with compassion. So he was allowed to see, so he could see himself for who he really is. That's what we can all bring to our work. So I'm going to finish this talk with giving you my 5 levels of compassion, if you will, and then we'll take questions and do some exercises. So compassion is essential. As a great spiritual teacher says, only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth. Now, compassion, as I distinguish it, exists on 5 levels. One is what I call ordinary human compassion. By ordinary, I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying it's really part of our makeup, and actually it is. This whole myth that we're by nature competitive, aggressive, selfish, and acquisitive is absolute capitalist nonsense. It's got nothing to do with genuine human nature. If you study people in their natural habitats, Aboriginal people, indigenous people around the world, universally, it's about giving, it's about communality, it's about generosity, it's about contribution, it's about being part of something much greater than just your little self. So, ordinary human compassion, literally, we're born with it. We're born with it. It's when we don't like to see other people suffer. In fact, we don't like to see other creatures suffer. That's the first level. Not enough. Necessary, not enough. There also has to be what I call the compassion of understanding. It's not enough that I don't like to see you suffer from a heroin addiction or from self-cutting or from bulimia. I also have to want to understand the sources of those behaviors, those dynamics. That means I have to really be curious about your life, what happened to you. That's the second level, the compassion of understanding. That takes some work. The third level is what I call the compassion of recognition. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never dealt with anyone, whether they're hopelessly addicted denizens of Vancouver's downtown east side, or more privileged people with anxieties and, relationship challenges, or anybody in between. I've never been anybody where I didn't recognize, to some degree, something about myself in them. And that's what I call the compassion of recognition. So, when I told my drug-addicted clients that, I got my own addictions. I don't do drugs, but I lie and I cheat and I manipulate and I neglect my duties. They said, "Hey, Doc, you're just like the rest of us, aren't you?" Well, here's the point. We are all just like the rest of us. And the compassion of recognition brings you from this level of expertise and superiority to this. Now there's two human beings. You might know more. I hope you do. But that doesn't make you an expert on them. And the more you can recognize it in yourself, and when appropriate, even share, when appropriate. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So that's the compassion of recognition. The fourth level I've already talked about. It's what I call the compassion of truth. And that means that when people recognize the truth, it's going to be painful. If you're afraid of people's pain, don't do trauma therapy, okay? Do some other kind of therapy. Behavior modification or this, but don't do trauma therapy. But you'll only be comfortable with other people's pain if you're comfortable with your own. So that's the compassion of truth. Which is, whatever is true needs to arise. The fifth one is the most difficult one of all, and that's why I showed you the video with Harold. And how many of you have worked in high security prisons or people with death row? You will probably agree, because this is a universal experience, they're some of the sweetest people you ever meet. These murderers. What are you talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. This morning when I talked about sensitivity, and I said that the more sensitive you are by temperament, by genetic temperament, when things go well, the better you'll do, but if things go not so well, the more hurt you're going to be. Some of these hardened criminals are amongst the most sensitive people in the world. When I say sensitive, I don't mean sensitive in the sense of being aware of other people's problems. I mean, in the terms of the depth of their feeling. That means when they were hurt, and they all were, they were really hurt. And their violence and their aggression came from that pain. That also means that when you go into that prison, or when you go into that prison, or anybody does, and treats them with compassion, like happened with Howard, that C12, that sweet self, that true self emerges. And we see this all the time. And I'm sure you've seen it in your offices as well. So that's what I call the compassion of possibility. That when you look at the person, you're not just mistaking them for the demeanor, for their behavior, for their body, for the tone of the voice, but you see the true self in them that they don't see. And you're a mirror for their true self. But here's the trick. If you're going to be a mirror, you better keep cleaning yourself. So the most important work we ever do is on ourselves, so that we can be that clear mirror. All right, questions? Yeah, so let's just take the... John's got the mic here.
Yep. All right, saw hands. We'll start your mic.
Okay, I guess I'm just going to say something a little controversial in the sense of being authentic. I was thinking about what you said about anger. And I was thinking about anger in men. And I know a lot of men that are terrified of accessing their anger.
Say it again, please. I just have trouble hearing, that's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about anger with men.
Anger.
With men.
Men, yeah.
You mentioned women, but I know I work with a lot of men.
Yeah.
Almost all the men I work with
Yeah.
struggle to access and express their anger.
Their healthy anger, yeah.
Healthy anger.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had a suggestion how you would address talking to these people, acknowledging the complexity of what happens to men, and how you would talk to them about the pain of grief and loss, and how they would maybe even access tenderness again.
Stay with the mic, would you? Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
What difficulty are you facing when you're trying to do that work?
They're so afraid of being rejected or canceled by their partners, their friends. They've often been abused or neglected. They've been told their whole lives that their pain isn't real. So accessing that pain seems terrifying to them because they'll be rejected.
Yeah. And they're men. They're supposed to suck it up and
right.
Not be vulnerable. But are you saying that these men have trouble expressing their anger?
Little to no ability. They're very afraid of conflict. They're very nice.
Because the frequent pattern with men is that they go from sadness to rage in a split second.
Right.
We're no longer talking about healthy anger.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about toxic rage.
Right. And what I'm saying is that's a story that we often tell that I don't see.
That's not what you see.
I don't see that. I'm trying to challenge that story truthfully, is that what I see is a lot of men who have been abused and neglected don't have access to their feelings. In fact, they keep being told the story that you said.
I think you're totally right.
Thank you.
But I don't think it's one or the other.
Great.
Okay, now, let me just ask you, the audience, a question here, okay? If you've either yourself experienced as a male, just let's start with the men in the room. If you've experienced manifested toxic rage, just raise your hand, okay? Yeah, so quite a few, okay? Now the women, if you've witnessed or been a subject of toxic male rage, raise your hand. Just about everybody. So it's not that, it's pretty common, okay? Now, I got it. A certain subset of men will be suppressing themselves and not even experiencing that toxic rage. I got it. Do they feel safe with you?
That's why they talk to me about this.
Yeah.
Because they feel safe. They trust me.
Well, my guess is that if they feel safe with you, then they will be able to access those emotions.
That's right. They do.
Sorry?
They do.
Well, good. Well, that's the answer to your question.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're able to show up with compassion for them, where they feel safe, then naturally they'll experience all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that... I appreciate your question. I'm not sure what you thought about it was controversial, but I think we see both. These are not gender issues. These are not gender issues as such.
I think the story I just wanted to acknowledge is like people like Niobe Way write about this. The story, though, of course, the toxic rage is real.
Yeah.
But really also acknowledging the very true reality that these men don't, the story that you're saying is the one that we hear all the time, that toxic rage is the norm. And that makes no space for also the narrative that there are many men who don't know how to access their feelings at all and feel incredibly silenced.
Absolutely.
And that's a cycle of violence that just keeps reiterating itself.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. All right. Somebody else?
I want to make sure the web gets included too. So we've got one online.
Online,
Yeah,
yeah.
an online question asking you, how do you think unresolved trauma, especially from childhood, impacts Generation Z's mental health in the age of social media and constant comparison?
Well, let's separate the question into three parts. First of all, how does multi-generational trauma, how does trauma affect generations? Just assume that trauma is multi-generational, because it is. In Canada, the indigenous people raised children much more in a healthy way than the Caucasians ever did. They never hit their kids, they didn't abuse their kids, they didn't yell at their kids. Their kids grew up very free, very confident, very much into their bodies, until colonialism came along and established these terrible residential schools, such as also existed here in the US, where generations of indigenous kids were sexually abused by the church and their teachers, where they were beaten for speaking their own language, where an indigenous little girl at age 4 had pins stuck in her tongue if she spoke her tribal language. Now, if you look at the indigenous communities in Canada, sexual abuse of children is rampant, family violence is rampant, killings are rampant, suicides are rampant, addictions are rampant. Why? Because of multi-generational trauma. In my own case, I didn't talk about much of my own life. I don't want to at this point, but I passed on my trauma to my kids. Before, I didn't know I was traumatized when I had kids. It took me much later to figure all that stuff out. And by the time I had, we'd passed it on. And I got bad news for all of you. We always marry somebody at the same level of trauma that we're at. That's just the law. It's just like water finding its own level. So that means that two traumatized people are raising kids without having dealt with their trauma. Of course we pass it on. So that's just how it goes. Not because we mean to. You know, pardon me, I'm going to use some profane language here. There's a British poet laureate called Philip Larkin, and he wrote this book on this poem on parenting, and he says, "They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They do not mean to what they did, but they do. They give you all the faults they had, and add an few extra just for you." And he ends the poem by saying, "Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as quickly as you can, and don't have any kids yourself." Okay? So that's that poem. So that is multi-generational. Just take it for granted. Until one generation begins to work it out and break the chain of transmission. And that can happen. And it's probably happening significantly in this generation. Now then you have the other question of the social media. And the social media, well, first of all, we know, if you look at the impact on brain development of children who watch a lot of screens, they're brain damaged. Functionally, they're brain damaged. I quote that research in the Metanormal, more and more evidence to that fact, so that actually we're damaging our kids. And not only that, children have a need. They actually have a need. It's one of the essential needs of children. We have a circuit in our brain for play, as do lion cubs and dogs and kittens and dolphins. Play is essential for brain development. One of the essential needs of human children, irreducible needs, is free, spontaneous play out in nature. Social media has destroyed that. Furthermore, social media connects kids with other immature creatures, so that immature creatures are now influencing each other across the airwaves in a ways that the parents don't even know about. That is mentioned in one of my books called Hold On to Your Kids. So the second level to the question was about social media. I forget what the third part was.
About comparisons,
About,
especially from childhood, mental health in the age of social media and constant comparison.
oh yeah, comparison. Let me tell you something. There's something called evaluative stress. Evaluative stress. They've done this experiment where they took paid volunteers who were supposed to give a little talk in front of a panel of judges. It was just a game. They were getting paid to do this. Nothing depended on it. But the judges, the so-called judges, were instructed to look bored and uninterested and critical. And those participants whose judges looked bored and uninterested and critical, they had higher stress hormone levels even days later. Evaluative, even though it was just an experiment, it had no significance. Now this society evaluates you all the time for your looks, for your smarts, for your compliance. And kids, immature kids, unmoored from adult guidance, are doing that to each other all the time. So the evaluative stress, and look at these kids that get attacked or criticized on the internet to the point where they're driven to suicide. Why? Because they have no real sense of themselves. Their sense of themselves depends on what other people think of them. In the absence of adult contact, it's what the peers think of them. And when the peers speak badly of them, it destroys them. It affects their physiology and so on. So, all of these things. Okay? Yeah? Other questions?
I'll go back to your lecture, and you talked about compassion of recognition, compassion of understanding, compassion of truth. Find it in ourselves first. So I'm going to ask a very difficult one.
Yeah.
We're approaching October 7th.
What?
We are approaching October 7th.
Yeah.
When the horrible massacre happened in Israel.
Yeah.
Where young children were murdered, burned, babies in ovens.
That didn't happen. There were no babies in ovens.
Oh yes, they were.
No, there weren't. That's been refuted even by the Israelis.
There were.
No, there weren't.
There were.
There were no babies in ovens.
Well.
But let's agree. Hold on. Let's agree on what we do agree on. Okay, a horrible massacre happened. People were killed in their homes. Civilians. Hold on a second.
Killed, were raped.
Stay with. No. Look. Let's agree that it was bad enough without adding stuff to it. Okay. Now I'm telling you, there's been no evidence of mass deliberate rapes. No such evidence.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry. There's no such evidence.
Oh yes, of course there was.
No, there isn't.
There
no,
was
I'm
a
sorry.
woman in the United Nations that came to Israel and did the research and brought those evidence to the United Nations.
I'll let you finish your question.
My
okay?
question is, how do I find compassion for these people?
Which people?
The animals that did that.
The animals that did that. I get your point of view, okay? In your point of view, everything you read actually happened the way you've read it. Hold on a second. I'm telling you what I understand your point of view to is. There was mass rapes, children beheaded, put into ovens, so on. Okay, now, objectively, I'm telling you, I looked at all the evidence I could. There were horrible massacres. Let's agree on that, okay? There were hostages, including young children and elderly people, civilians that should never have been captured, that were taken into captivity. Let's agree on that, okay? On the specific issues of babies in ovens and mass rapes, you and I are not going to agree, because I looked at evidence that you haven't looked at. But hold on a second. Let's just agree on what we do agree on, okay? And then let's take your question. How do we have compassion for these animals? Well, I'm not going to get into a big political rant here, but I'll tell you what I think very quickly, okay? If I saw the world from the perspective that you see the world from, I would 100% agree with you. But that's not how I see the world. That's not how I see the world. Number one. Number two, I've been to Palestine. 2.5 years ago, I went there to work with Palestinian women who've been tortured in Israeli jails, which has been documented by Israeli Physicians for Human Rights, by B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, by United Nations and others. Nobody ever talks about the thousands of Palestinians. Did you know that 2 Palestinian doctors were tortured to death recently by Israel? Doctors tortured to death. Now my question to you is, and I'm not going to go into the history, this is not the place for it, but I have a different view of the history. I used to see it the way you do. I don't anymore. I'm not gonna go into how I do see the history, because this is not the. Just let me finish. Honest to God, I'll give you the last word. I promise you. I do promise you that. Okay. History did not begin on October the 7th. And here's what I know. Most of my fellow Jews. Now in Canada, you know, I mentioned the residential schools. In Canada, 4 years ago, there was a poll, a national poll. Now thousands of children died in those schools. People were tortured, raped, all kinds of stuff. Not even controversial. There was a poll in Canada. 70% of Canadians 4 years ago said they knew nothing or little about the residential schools. 70% of Canadians knew nothing or little about the residential schools. So what happened to indigenous people? If you do a poll in the United States based on all the Hollywood movies that people have seen, until very few years ago and even now, and most people will know nothing about what happened to the indigenous people here. Nothing. The genocide, the torture, the rape, the starvation. They know nothing about it. And in some states in the United States, it's illegal to even to teach it in the schools. Now, do you think the average Jew knows anything about the indigenous people of Palestine? Now, no, just a second. So, these animals that you talk about, you know, the first massacre of Palestinians in Gaza didn't happen last year. Didn't even happen 4 or 5 years ago when they killed hundreds of children with their bombs. It happened in 1956. But just let me just a second. In 1956, they massacred 200 civilians. Do you know about it? Do you know about it? You've never heard of it. Of course you haven't heard of it. That's why you can call them animals. Otherwise, you'd see them like human beings like the rest of us. Anyway, I'm done. Go ahead. Yeah.
So human beings can murder and rape and maim and cut breasts of women, that's okay?
No, it's not okay.
Well, that's the message you're giving.
Did I say it was okay?
That's the message you're giving. That's the claps
Okay,
I'm hearing.
how many of you heard me say that it's okay to rape and kill people? Raise your hands.
I will finish with one thing.
By the
There
way-
is a Nova.
By the way,
There
how
is
do you
a Nova-
feel about the rapes of Palestinian women by the Israeli army in 1948?
That's a false.
No, it's not.
Yes, it
No,
is.
it's not.
Yes, it is.
You know what? You want to believe me? Read the Israeli historians.
Well,
I
we'll
can give you
differ
the
in our
names.
opinions. I lived it.
No, I can give you.
lived it.
I can
lived
give
in
you.
Ashkelon.
I can give you the names
Let
of
me
the.
tell you one thing. In United States, we teach kids. I'm sorry. You will let me finish. In United States, we teach kids how to be in fire alarm.
Okay, I'm done. This is what happens, people. Is you and I don't live in the same world. But let me tell you one thing. This is not about you and I. Okay? There was a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust called Edith Egger. Have you ever heard of her? Okay, she's a therapist here in California. She was on the same train to Auschwitz as my grandparents. Okay, okay, I'm telling you something now, okay? I'm not debating with you anymore. You and I don't live in the same world. We don't. You're a good person, good heart. We don't live in the same world. Just let me finish. Edith was on the same train to Auschwitz as my grandparents. Her parents were on the same train. My grandparents didn't survive. Her parents didn't survive either. She did. And at some point in her book called The Choice, which is worth reading, she goes back to Berghof, I think, which is Hitler's lair in the Bavarian Alps. And she goes back there to forgive Hitler. Okay? And she says, not because it's okay what Hitler did, but because I didn't want to keep him imprisoned in my heart anymore. So I'm not here to preach forgiveness, but I'm telling you, that place where we call other people animals, if you want to live there, that's your choice. I don't want to live there. I want to understand people. I want to understand what happened to them. I want to know why they behaved the way they behaved. I'm not into justifying taking civilian hostages. I said that was unjustifiable. Why you didn't hear me, I don't know. I said there were massacres that shouldn't have happened. Why you didn't hear me, I don't know. You know why you didn't hear me? Because you live in a bubble, that's why. Anyway. All right. Other questions?
Over here, Gabor.
Anybody, by the way, wants to know about my visit to the occupied territories? There's a film online you can watch called Where the Olive Trees Weep. Watch it.
Gabor. Gabor, I'm over here, over on this side.
Sorry, where are we? Yeah.
I'm here.
Hi, Amy.
Hi. Being a healer.
Let me just say, this is difficult. This is really difficult. It's difficult because this debate has been going on in the Jewish community for over 100 years now. Not that you know that, but it has been going on for 100 years. It's going on especially right now. And you can see how, whether I'm right, whether my friend here is right, whether neither of us are right, just how big the feelings are. And it's even for people of goodwill like you and I. And I know you respect me. You wouldn't be here otherwise, you know? It's so difficult to communicate. It's so difficult. Anyway, Amy, yeah?
Being a healer in a traumatized world.
Yeah.
For me, that has shown up as I am still doing my own work.
Yeah.
I'm still in my own expansion. There's still waves that hit me
Yeah.
and that I have to ride. So as I work with patients or clients or course members, whoever I'm working with, how have you found that balance between me sharing what I'm going through and to be authentic versus just holding that space for them and not sharing anything of my own?
Well, The question of sharing is a vexatious one, because on the one hand, we're always told not to share about ourselves, that it's unprofessional, which I think is nonsense. But there's appropriate sharing, there's inappropriate sharing. Okay? Now it's always a question of why am I sharing? If I'm sharing because I want sympathy, then I'm using the client. If I'm sharing because I want to look like a good guy, I'm using the client. And the client's in my office in the first place because they were used sometime or another. But if I'm sharing because I want them to see that in our essential humanity we're not different, then that's liberating for people. So I don't have an issue with sharing as long as it's come from a place of, I get it, because I've had the same experience. Not, oh, poor me, please help me. Or look how honest I am, you know. No, just, I get it. That's your experience, that's my experience as well. So that's where the sharing comes from. That I think is healthy. Yeah, another question?
Yeah, we're going to take one from the web here. Cassandra wants to know, why all these mind-body connections, do you think, why are they medically ignored?
Say that again?
Why are all these mind-body connections, these proven things, medically ignored?
Why are they ignored in the medical schools? Well, you know what, I'm not going to answer that question. And the reason I won't, it's therapeutically not helpful. Okay, it's not going to help anybody if I gave you my theory. Lots of reasons. The influence of money, the pharmaceutical companies, the traumatization of doctors themselves, how they're uncomfortable. You know, I mean, you know, how do you build a cult? You know how you build a cult? You give them a uniform, a special jargon. You sleep deprive them. You subject them to authority and leaders. You send them to medical school. You know, a lot of doctors are very traumatized. If you measure the biological variables, I'm not going to go into details, of doctors in training, they age faster than other people their age. So in order to look at trauma, people have to look at their own. They don't want to do that. There's all kinds of reasons. But you know what? It's not helpful for me to go into that, and maybe it wasn't that helpful to engage in discussion either, but there it was. Anyway, carry on. Yeah.
Hi, Gabor. Hi, everybody. My name is Pamela Hawkins, and just felt like me lighten the load and validate some of that Gabor was talking about. You remember the video they showed of the young man that was in jail and his story of drug use and so forth. And but we are hardwired to heal. Myself, I am one, as a health professional, never taking movement for granted. I talk about my story of resilience and my fight with debilitating disease and winning with MS. Never taking, I mean, someone that had impeccable nutrition and as a scientist and researcher, I said, what I felt like when I heard MS, like a predator was lurking around ready to ambush me. But I said no. When my immune system, this system that's designed to protect me, to keep track, keeps a score of germs, I said no. I had to look back. Getting to the root was where the healing began, and it took me on a journey going backwards to, okay, being trapped in a house fire and having Bell's palsy as a sophomore at University of Florida. And I was like, but I forgot about me in that suppressing healthy anger. You know, there are some things I needed to get angry back and say, no, that wasn't all right. So I just thought I wanted to show, and we fight for ourselves. So I have his books. I have When the Body Says No. So I encourage everyone in this room, when the body says no, whether it's a cold, COVID, or cancer, don't just take the status quo and say, I'm accept that diagnosis, but say, why my body? Why in me? And what do I need to learn about me to be whole, healing and whole, and finding your way back to wellness? So,
okay, thank you. When I was writing When the Body Says No, and by the way, we're going to do an exercise now, but before we take more questions, we're going to do an exercise. Oh, stop it. John, listen to me. Before we do take more questions, we're going to do an exercise, okay? But when I was writing When the Body Says No, I hadn't done the research yet. So I was phoned by a group of, a support group for people with MS, multiple sclerosis. And they said, we heard you're working on a book on stress and health. Would you come and talk to us and tell us your theories? And I said, yeah, I will. So I went, and I began with an apology. I said, look, I'm so sorry. I have no idea if what I'm saying is true. I've done no research. I'm just giving you my impressions. So if I insult you in any way at all, please forgive me. But here's what I think. And then I told them that people who develop MS are people who are very nice. They have trouble saying no. They suppress healthy anger, etc., etc. When I finished the talk, they all said, you just described our lives. And I said, great. Are some of you willing to be interviewed for the book? So 23 of them out of 25 put their hands up. They couldn't say no, you know. And there was a woman there. There was a woman there who says, I can't even say the word. Now, think about that one, because if you're parents, if you're a parent, what does your kid start saying at 1.5, quite spontaneously? No. That's nature's wisdom. Because nature says, you need a barrier behind which you can develop your yes. If you don't know how to say no, your yeses don't mean a thing. So you better say no automatically. So that's what, and then parents call that the terrible twos. I mean, that's nothing terrible about it, totally natural. A friend of mine, Ben was a doctor, and no, Harold was a doctor. Ben was his 2.5-year-old child, and Harold said to Ben one day, Ben, do you want an apple? And Ben said, no, I want an apple. It's the will asserting itself. Now, there's one woman there, and she said, I can't say no. I said, okay, good. Give me $100 right now. She said, I don't have $100. I said, that's okay. After the meeting, we can go to the ATM machine and get the... She said, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. I said, I'm just trying to get you to say no to a ridiculous demand from a perfect stranger to whom you owe nothing whatsoever. She said, I can't do it. So we're going to do an exercise now, okay? I'm going to ask each of you very quickly to find a partner, okay? All right, everybody's got a partner. Here's what's going to happen. I'm just going to give this 3 minutes each, okay? You're going to put a question to each other, and when the first partner puts the question to the second partner, the person who asked the question just shuts up. They just listen. You're not there to support or to validate or to empathize or to disagree with. You're just there to really get what your partner's saying. At the end of 3 minutes, and that's all we have time for, usually I make it longer, I'm going to say stop, switch, in which case now turn it around, and then the second partner will put the same question to the first partner. And then the second partner now just listens. With no agenda. Your only agenda is to really get what your partner's saying. Here's the question. Tell me where in your life you have difficulty saying no. All right, that's the question. Now this shows up, I'll repeat the question again. Tell me where in your life you have difficulty saying no. Now, this shows up usually in 2 major areas: personal relationships, spouses, friends, adult kids, parents, or in work. So whatever you identify your difficulty saying no, and here's what I mean, but there's a no that wants to be said. Like when I say to this woman, give me $100, she doesn't want to give me $100. So but there's a no that wants to be said, and you're not saying it. Okay? Clear? All right? Please start.
So, and that's in little ways, again, like I enjoy being on all these things.
If I could get 3 or 4 minutes with you out there.
But talk to your partner. I know I did. Okay, it's nice. Okay. I'm fine. Please stop. This is part of an exercise that is in the myth of normal, but I can give you the other parts very simply. I've been told that this exercise alone, by the way, before I go on, I need to say something. I apologize to you. Okay? You're asking a question, and I allowed myself to get triggered and get into an argument with you. So I apologize to all of you. It's an example. It's an issue I lived with all my life. I used to believe as this lady does. I don't anymore. But I have tremendously strong feelings about it. No, excuse me. Let me just talk now. Okay, now. All I'm saying is the proper response to your question would have been, I understand where you're coming from, but this is not the place for me to address that issue. That's what I should have said. Okay? And nothing you said explains my own emotional reaction. That's totally my own responsibility. Okay? All right. Now, this exercise in terms of when you don't say no, that's the first part. You can do it once a week. Where this week did I not say no? Where there's a no that wanted to be said and I didn't say it? Just write it down. Second question. What is the impact of my not saying no? So if you actually look at the impact, fatigue, sleeplessness, resentment, worse, all kinds of physical symptoms, what's the impact? Self-criticism, shame, that's the impact. The third question is, what is the belief behind my inability to say no? If I say no, then they won't like me. Remember what I said about attachment versus authenticity? They won't like me. Or if I say no, I'm selfish. If I say no, I'm letting down my responsibilities. That's important, because once you look at the belief, you can actually question it. Is it really true? Does me saying no actually make me selfish? If I've been working all night and you call me up to have a cup of coffee in the morning with you, and I said no, am I really being selfish if I say no to you? So that's the third question. Fourth question is, where did I learn that belief? Well, you know where you learned it. You learned it in childhood. Fifth question is, who would I be if I didn't believe that? if I didn't believe that if I say no, that makes me a bad person, who would I be? And the last question is, where am I not saying yes? Where is there a yes in my life that I want to express, that I want to manifest, I want to live, but I'm not doing it because I'm too busy not saying no to all the other stuff? So those two little words, yes and no, make all the difference in your life. That's just a little exercise you can do or teach your clients if you want to. It really does change things very quickly. All right, questions? John, if you run the mic around.
Yeah. Let's take one from you.
As a social worker, I'm curious about ways to change our system, and I feel like you probably have a lot more experience with this than me. How would we start to advocate for this to be taught to physicians on that level, for like call it for PhD level, or how would we advocate for change within our system?
Well, look, so first of all, the change is happening. I mean, Harvard University now has this little mind-body institute, you know? That's good. Harvard University should be a mind-body institute, but at least they have something. More and more doctors are reaching out beyond traditional medicine to functional medicine, integrated medicine, and all this. These conferences that people are coming at to hear about trauma from people like Amy and Nadine and Bessel and myself and others, this wouldn't have happened 10, 15 years ago. This itself is a sign of change. So I don't beat my head against walls trying to convince people of anything. I just think we should all just speak our truth at whatever platform we have, on whatever issue, whether it be political or personal or therapeutic or professional, and trust that there's a need for this in the world, and the world will respond, which it is. I mean, look, the first time I gave a public talk after my first book got published, 25 years ago now, there were 6 people there, and 2 of them were my childhood friends. So, you know, just keep doing your thing is what I'm saying. But don't worry too much about trying to change institutions. Let natural erosion and evolution do that. Okay? Questions?
So we're going to take one from the web here. Alexandra asks if you can speak to the importance of language in our work, and do you encourage people to use mind-body terminology regularly? Why or why not?
It's not that I encourage people to use any kind of language. It's that I notice what kind of language they use. Because when somebody's talking to you, they're giving you a narrative, which is the thought content, but then there's the words they use to express the thought content. Those words are always meaningful. So you know, if I was working with somebody therapeutically, I pay a lot of attention to the language, to their verbal language, also to the tone of their voice. It's quite extraordinary how sometimes, just to give one example, very mature and confident and competent women can sound like a 5-year-old little girl when they go back to that vulnerable, hurt little self. And then you notice that. You notice that. Let me tell you an amazing story. I had a person once who was diagnosed with what was then called multiple personality disorder. Now it's called dissociative identity disorder. So it was trauma-based. She split herself into all these personalities. One of her personas was that of an 8-year-old little boy. And she had asthma. So I prescribed for her a medication called theophylline. Theophylline is a liquid that you drink that keeps the airways from narrowing. So one day, the 8-year-old boy calls me. he's having tremors and he's got nauseated, he's got diarrhea. These are typical symptoms of thiolophyllene overdose. When this person was in their 8-year-old body, they had the physiology of an 8-year-old. Now, I thought I was seeing things. It's been described in the medical literature. People in different personas will have different EEGs. They'll have different responses to skin stimulation. I'm talking about the mind-body unity, and to go back to this question, a person's voice tells you so much about where they're coming from. So whatever you do, don't just pay attention to people's narrative. You don't get lost in the narrative. Pay much more attention to the language they use, to their body language, to the tone of their voice, and address them. Much more important than just dealing with the narrative. That's my answer to that question. Yeah?
Hi, yes, my question is, to what level do you assert your authenticity as a person who is working to recover that? And how much do you just give an emotionally immature person less access to you if they cannot accept that vulnerability with safety?
Well, wait a minute. So let's start with the first question, okay? Repeat the first question again.
To what level do you assert your authenticity as a person who is recovering authenticity?
To what level do you what?
Assert your own...
Assert your vulnerability. Who wants to know?
Me? I could lie and say my clients, but I want to know.
Okay, you want to know, all right? So you're asking, to what degree do you assert your authenticity?
When surrounded by unsafe people.
Mm-hmm. What do you do?
Well, I've done work on giving those people less access to myself.
Okay.
But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that approach.
Well, look, now partly it's situational. If I had 6 cops with their guns pointed at me, my first priority would not be to assert my authenticity. But barring that extreme situation, you have a decision to make. You can have 2 kinds of pain. The pain of self-suppression and pretense and self-denial, or the pain of not being liked by some other people. Attachment versus authenticity. I can't tell you what to choose. You have to decide. There might not be a pain-free option. And sometimes the best you can do, no, if you can have authenticity and attachment, great. If you have friends who can accept your authentic manifestation and say, oh, great, well, that's good. But if some people in your life can't handle it because they're not ready for it, and that's not what they bought in for when they established a relationship with you, then you have a choice to make. Which pain would I rather have? The pain of self-suppression or the pain of perhaps being rejected? Your call. But there may not be a pain-free option, okay? At least not in the short term.
Thank you.
All right, does that answer it? Thank you.
Okay, one from the web. Tiffany, let me see, okay. Tiffany shares, she says she's on board with most of her clients.
Yeah.
But the mothers that she's worked with who's lost, your children have died by suicide or homicide.
Yeah.
Trauma plus grief plus injustice entwined. It feels intolerable to them. And she says, who am I to say that it is not?
What feels intolerable to them?
the trauma and grief, the enormity of it all, I think, is what she's saying.
It is intolerable. It's too much. It's not what any human beings should have to deal with. But I don't understand the question, because this is what it goes back to what I said. You have to be able to be with people's pain. You have to be able to be with people's pain. I worked with people recently who's lost entire families, and I have to be with their pain. And so what I would say to the questioner is, if you're not able to be with the pain of these mothers who've so tragically lost their beloved children, for whom they would have given their lives if they could have, if you can't be with their pain, then recognize your limitation. Or do the work that'll help you be with their pain and stay compassionate and still believe in life. Maybe you can achieve that stage. If you can, you'll be able to be with the pain of these women. If you can't, you might not be the person to help them. Okay?
Hi, I was wondering if you ever struggle finding the feeling of hope in the work that you do.
And can you just wave your hand?
Right here.
Oh, yeah, okay, hi, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I was just wondering if you ever struggle with finding the feeling of hope or remaining hopeful doing this work.
I don't deal in hope at all. Okay, and you might say I'm hopeless. Okay? Because hope is for something to happen in the future. I don't go there. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. When I look at some situations, I just see things getting worse in the short term. That's my best assessment. But I deal in possibility. My question is, what is possible for people? So when I see somebody like Howard, or in another context, when I see people who are supposed to be enemies actually embracing each other and supporting each other, which I've also seen recently, I see human possibility. And that possibility is in the present moment. So I just believe in possibility. I believe in human possibility. And if I didn't, we all do. You all believe in possibility. You all believe it's possible for people to transform, to learn, to change, to let go of hatred, to let go of judgment, to find a common humanity with each other, to find their own humanity. That's not a hope of something happening in the future. That's a possibility that exists in the present moment. So it's that possibility that keeps me going, not any hope for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi.
Amazing. Hi. So this morning, you shared something that really resonated with me. You mentioned how you wet the bed until you were about age 13. And that just, again, I could relate a lot to that. And I was just wondering, it's something that kind of filled me with deep, deep shame. And I really just disconnected completely from my body for years. And
shame, you said?
Shame, yeah.
Are you willing to come up here?
Oh boy, sure. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, what's your name?
Emily.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
So you're talking about shame. What about shame?
Yes, so I'm wondering if you had similar feelings with shame with that, just the like loss of sensation over your body and just it being such a vulnerable thing to happen to you and for it to be happening like later in life, later than normal. And I never connected
Okay,
it to a...
slow down a sec.
Yeah, I'm nervous.
Okay. What are you experiencing right now?
Activation.
Yeah, what else?
Sweating,
Okay.
nervousness.
Okay. All right.
Hot.
What about in your body, in your chest?
My heart is beating very, very fast. My shoulders are up here.
Okay. Is there some fear for you?
Yes.
What's the fear?
The fear is that I'm going to embarrass myself or stutter.
And embarrass yourself meaning what?
Sharing something too vulnerable or that I think isn't going to be beneficial for others and only beneficial for me.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here, okay? First of all, if in this room of I don't know how many hundred people, you saw somebody else come up on stage and share as you have shared, what would you think of them?
That they were really brave.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So do you notice then that you look on other people with more compassion than you look at yourself? Okay? You notice that? And that's a constant theme. People have a lot more compassion in general for others than they do for themselves. Okay? Now there's a reason for that. Okay? How are you feeling at the moment? Yeah, what's going on?
Conflicted.
Sorry?
I'm feeling conflicted.
Which means?
I'm feeling multiple things. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what I'm feeling.
Just physically.
Relief.
Okay.
And awe.
Yeah.
Gabor Mate.
I can totally understand that. Okay. No. The relief is about what? What's the relief about?
The relief is that I'm not alone.
No, you're not.
Even if I'm the only person in this room other than you, who wet the bed when they were 13,
Yeah.
I'm not alone in the shame, it feels like.
Yeah, okay. So tell me about, what do you feel ashamed about? What's the self-accusation?
That I was different, that there was something wrong with me. I couldn't do the thing.
So there's an assumption there. Maybe you were different, right? But that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Is it possible to be different without there being something wrong?
Yeah.
So let's not mix the two up. How many of you have felt different growing up than other people around you? Look around all these different people. You know why? Because it's the sensitive people who feel different. And they see things and experience things differently than other people. Then they're made wrong for it. And you're still buying into it. But can you see how it might be a gift to be different?
Yes.
Tell me the gifts.
The gifts of being different?
Yeah.
Well, being able to see different perspectives. That's
Exactly.
how change happens.
Exactly.
Art, creativity, it's all built in differences.
Exactly. So you're different, but does that make you worse?
No.
Not necessarily, yeah. No. The shame. Basically, shame says, I want to sink into the ground, I don't even want to be here, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what kids feel when they're not accepted. Because the child's got two things your child can believe, okay? One is, this world is cruel, it can't understand me, it's hopeless, these adults are stupid. Okay, the child can believe that. Or the child can believe, oh, there's something wrong with me. And maybe if I work hard enough, I can fix it.
Yep.
Now, which belief do you think is more acceptable to the child?
The latter.
The latter one. So even that shame came along to help you. Do you see that?
Yeah.
But if you ask yourself, how old is that shame? I mean, what age would you put on it?
1.
All right. Now, if you could talk to that 1-year-old now, Emily, if you could talk to the 1-year-old Emily from your adult self, what would you want to say to her?
Is it too cliche to say that it's going to be okay and that there's nothing wrong with you?
Yeah. And you would hold her, right?
Yeah, I would hold her.
Hold her now.
Thank you.
You got her?
Hmm?
You think you have her?
Yeah, I have her.
Good. Next time the shame arises, just hold her.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Is that clear? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, take care.
Thank you, Gabor Mate.
Bye.
All right, let's have another question and come back here a little bit. We got to pay attention to the back of the room. Sorry, folks. It's hard to pick. Okay.
Thank you. I first want to say thank you as an Indigenous woman from Alaska. In Vancouver is where my people are from, the Tsimshian people. Thank you. My question is, as a healer who has experienced the effects of historical trauma on our people, I am working boots on the ground with adolescents that are also experiencing the impacts. What advice would you give to, I guess, someone like me?
Well, what advice do you need?
I think where I struggle the most is feeling like I hit a wall.
Like what?
Like I hit a wall because I work with adolescents who come from two different sources.
Yeah.
One source is the juvenile justice system.
Yeah.
And the other source is the tribal health clinic that I work for.
Yeah.
So they're either coming with behaviors that are they're either coming with emotional trauma that is like imploding inside and they feel suicidal and do a lot of self-harm, or it's external and they're harming other people. And I struggle with the ones that are coming from the juvenile justice system because it feels like they're harder to reach.
What is your struggle? Just to help them open up, or?
I think getting past the barrier of the defenses.
Yeah. Well, look, these kids have been beaten up by life since they were born, most of them, as you know. They were born into, as I said earlier, generations of traumatized families. They were imbibing trauma, even in the womb, the uterus of their mothers when they were pregnant.
Oh, I know.
Maybe their mothers were even drinking when they were pregnant, some of them. They've had many blows aimed at them, and the juvenile court system just adds to it. It takes a lot to be with these kids. And you can't force them to open up. What you can do, as much as you can, is to be an empathetic witness, to accept them exactly the way they are, and not need, and drop any need that you have for them to open up. Because as soon as they sense your need for them to open up, so you can feel better about yourself as a therapist, they're going to shut down even more. So I'd say that the most important work you can do here, this is a very facile and very quick answer to a very complex question, but the best thing you can do for them is to really work on yourself so that you're not uncomfortable with their discomfort, so that you're not uncomfortable with their defenses, so that you need nothing from them. And I think that gives you the best chance of being the person for them in whose presence they feel safe enough to open up. That's what you can do. And you're going to fail many times. And you're going to have to accept the failure. But that doesn't mean you haven't done any good. Because everybody here can tell you, how many times, just raise your hand if you had this will be the last comment I'll be able to make. How many of you had the experience of somebody you don't even recall coming up to you in the street or somewhere and saying, you don't remember me, but something you said to me 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or just the way you spoke to me made such a huge difference in my life. Raise your hand if you had that experience. Well, you're going to have that experience too. But you may not have it next week. Maybe 10 years from now. So just keep doing what you're doing and drop any need for them to be any different.
I think that the need that I have is it feels like an urgency because I have children and I've broken the bond. I do my own work and I feel like it's not enough time. I have these kids for a whole year in
It's not
residential.
enough. Look, the system is inadequate, which is a mild way to put it. They need much more than you can give them in a year even. It's totally true. But as long as you're deciding to do this work, just do what you can while you're with them. And you're right, the system is inadequate. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you all for your attention.
I think we need to understand a bunch of things. We need to understand that there's a strategic thing there, serves American imperial interests, has always done. That's why the British started this project. They did not do it for the brown eyes of the Jewish people. They did it because it was in the strategic interests of the British Empire. And that's one reason the United States does it. We do not give $3.8 billion a year plus the $10 billion that Biden's asked for additionally this year for anything to do with sentiment. It has to do with strategy, it has to do with oil, it has to do with interests, imperial interests. It has to do with a couple other things. It does have to do with the evangelical right. That's one of the things that moved Britain to support the Balfour Declaration, to support a Jewish national home in an almost entirely Arab country. And it's one of the things that moves American politicians. The votes, the money, the concentrated political power of the evangelical right. It has to do with money. Our politicians are whores. They're bought and sold. That needs to be said. And the bigger the donor, the more services they get. And that's part of it. And if we ask, why is it that our media is so complicit? Well, it's partly because our media is an echo chamber for the people in power in Washington. I read the New York Times some mornings and I say the New York Pravda Times. And I read the Washington Post, I read the Washington Izvestia Post. They are like the Soviet press during the Cold War. They are, whether it's the Ukraine war or whether it's this war, they echo power. But they also echo money. Who owns the Washington Post? Jeff Bezos. Who owns MSNBC, MSNBC, NBC Universal. Who owns those institutions of the press? The same people who own the politicians, the same people who own our universities. Who runs our universities? Who runs our universities? Not the presidents and the deans and the department chairmen and women. It's the Board of Trustees. What is the Board of Trustees? It's the same people who finance the politicians, same people who own the media. So if we see a compliant media with a government that is supportive of Israel because of votes, because of the evangelical right, because of imperial strategic objectives, it's very simple. When we see university administrations kowtowing to one narrative on Palestine, as they have done right across the country, it's for the same reason that our media does it, and the same reason that our government does it. It's money, it's power. It's very, very, very simple. I can give you a more sophisticated explanation, but I think that really sums it up, frankly.
I don't have a better answer to that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I reflect on the fact that...
Can I say something? I hope I did not insult sex workers. I did not mean to do that. I did not mean to do that.